Well, Marcelo, first want to say thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, for real.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't help but notice, and those listening will notice that you, in the field you're in, we also just interviewed a colleague of yours, Avi Loeb, and we talked about his book Interstellar and Aliens. And I just mentioned that to you. I didn't know you all would know each other, but you do. Is it just everybody who deals with space kind of has to know each other to some extent?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a smallish community, astrophysics. And I've known Avi for decades now,
Hmm.
and he's always been a guy that has a very open mind, and
Mhm.
it's not just the guy that calculates and thinks about data, but he's also thinking about deeper implications, which is in a sense what I do too.
Mhm.
So we've always hit it off that way.
Yeah. Well, I find this interesting given that I recently spoke to him. And again, this podcast isn't about that necessarily. It just happened to work this way. And I think it's fascinating, which is, of course, we're not alone. There are definitely extraterrestrials and we will find them. And that is where we need to think of in terms of humanity's future.
Mhm.
And from my perspective, it looks like your beliefs are almost exactly opposite, which is we don't need to look outwardly, we need to focus inwardly with ourselves, with our actions, and where we are on this planet. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I just rather ask you: do you believe, or do you feel that your beliefs and Avi's are almost diametrically opposed?
Yes, and I
Okay.
think you said it very clearly. The question of life, right? First of all, let's talk a little bit about life because I think that is an absolutely fascinating conversation. Just
Yeah.
that one. I mean, people take it for granted, right? That we live in this planet, that we are alive, that we can think, that we can ask big questions about existence, that we can construct a scientific narrative that tries to make sense of who we are and where we exist. But the point is that we shouldn't be taking any of this for granted. And my book really is an exploration of, okay, how did we get here? How come we became suddenly the owners of the natural world and the planetary, bosses, from being descendants of a bacterium that existed 3 billion years ago? How come we created this story of who we are? And
Mhm.
is this the right story to be thinking about? And so, behind my point of view and Avi's point of view, really there is a conflict of worldviews. And the idea is the following, and I go over the whole thing in the Dawn of a Mindful Universe. So it's all there, but very basically, the idea is this, right? So, from the beginning, let's go back a long time ago before agrarian civilization. So we've been around, we meaning Homo sapiens, our species, we've been around for about 300,000 years, give or take.
Mhm.
Of these 300,000 years, 95% of the time, we're just bands of nomads, like hunter-gathering societies, small communities, moving around, getting what they could, hunting to survive. And from those cultures, came this connection with the natural world that was magical. The world was a mystery, and because of that, the way these people created a relationship with this mystery of existence was by saying, there are gods everywhere, there are spirits everywhere, the mountains, the rivers, the forest, the volcano, the winds, the storms, all of that is controlled by forces beyond our understanding. And these people had a very deep respect to the land that they thought was sacred. And this is precisely the same kind of attitude that, and really worldview, that indigenous cultures across the planet have had for thousands of years. So they have kept this understanding that we live in a sacred place
Mhm.
and that we have to respect it and coexist with it, not being above it. But
Mhm.
then what happened? Well, 10,000 years ago, agrarian civilization started. People started to plant and coalesce into bigger urban centers. And because of that, you needed to have more control over people because communities were growing. You needed more discipline. You needed leaders that were more powerful. And with that came the understanding that nature could be dangerous and was pushed outside the city walls, right? So the city walls was where we existed, not the rest of the world. And then what happened was that we started to lose connection with the natural world. It became more and more objectified, meaning it's something that we use for our own benefit.
Right.
So that became the way we dealt with nature. And of course, with the industrial civilization, fast forward to about 150 years ago, industrial civilization took that to the limit and said, we own the planet. We can eat its resources and consume everything in order to sustain our project of civilization, our growth, progress. Progress is about moving forward without any kind of thinking or reflection about what is the environmental cost of what we're doing. And it worked beautifully. And we did. Look at this, 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, I wouldn't be sitting down with you
Right.
in this amazing thing. I don't know where you are. I'm in northern New Hampshire,
I'm in outside of DC. So yeah.
outside of DC. And that's just wonderful and spectacular and should be celebrated, everything. But there's the other side of this conversation, which is Copernicus, and that's where the space connection comes in. Copernicus told us that the Earth is just a planet going around the sun, which it absolutely is. The Earth is just a planet going around the sun from an astronomical perspective. From that Copernicanism, this moving of us and our planet from the center of everything, which was the way people thought about, to Copernicanism, Earth lost its currency as a special place. It became just another world. And the upshot of all that is that the way people see science is, man, these guys, the more we understand about the universe, the less important we become. Earth was moved from the center. Then the sun was the center, but the sun is just another star. And there are billions of stars in our galaxy. And the galaxy, as we move on to the 20th century, hey, it's not just this galaxy. There are hundreds of billions of galaxies out there, and the universe is expanding. And even the stuff we're made of, the atoms that we're made of, is not important because really the universe is controlled by these things called dark matter and dark energy. And so we are basically nothing, right? We're not important.
Right.
And we trivialized our planet and the very fundamental fact that life exists here. So back to Avi.
Yeah.
The idea is sometimes even called the principle of mediocrity in astronomy, which is the notion that our planet is not important. And because of that, there'll be many other Earths out there, or Earth-like worlds, because there are so many. Come on, just our galaxy has over 1 trillion. 1 trillion is a 1 with 12 zeros.
Wow.
Planets. And then we have the moons. Jupiter has more than 70 moons. I mean, it's a lot of place, right? A lot of worlds. Each of these worlds is different. And so you say, hey, there are all these planets, all these Earths. Why should our planet be so special? There should be life. So Copernicanism was extrapolated to go from a statement about astronomy, yes, we move around the sun, for sure, to a statement about the mediocrity of Earth as a planet in this big scheme of things, meaning there'll be many other Earths out there, and because of that, there'll be other worlds with life. That is, and because of that, there'll be civilizations, and civilizations will travel and may visit us. That's the Avi Loeb, and not just him, but a lot of other people's perspective.
Sure.
So my perspective is exactly the opposite.
So let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Is it possible to hold both mindsets or belief systems simultaneously? Because, and if so, is there a flaw with that? Because I kind of find myself in the middle, which is I am fascinated every day by this planet. And a lot of my life has been dedicated to making it a better place.
Mhm.
Yet, I also believe we are insignificant. So it's like, that's where my mindset sits at the moment. Is there an issue with that?
Yes.
Great. Tell me about it.
And
I want it to be. I want to feel more important. Trust me.
yeah. So the issue with that is that you cannot think of Earth-like as only having a planet that is going around a star like the sun with the same sort of radius and mass, which are astronomical properties. What really defines our planet is not just those numbers, but is the fact that it has a vibrant biosphere. It is a living world. And then and why is that important? Well, because just take a look around, look at the other planets in our solar system. They're all dead worlds. I mean, if there is anything on Mars, it doesn't look like there is. And if there was, maybe billions of years ago, there's no remains of anything that really relevant happened there. Other moons of our solar system where we kind of think there could be something, they'll be so cold and so different that certainly there is no complex life anywhere. And nowadays, there's this whole field of astrobiology, which is wonderful, which is the study of life in the universe. And we have now mapped over almost 6,000 other worlds, other planets,
Wow.
moving around other stars, which is really spectacular, right? This is
Yeah.
something from the last 15 years or so.
Wow.
And because before we say, yeah, there may be other planets out there, but in science, maybe is not certainty. So it's a hypothesis. Now we know it's true. And that is just mind-boggling, right? Because if you think of our galaxy,
Mhm.
where the sun is, you say you have 200 billion other stars out there.
Right.
And we can now say with confidence that the vast majority of these stars will have planets moving around it.
Okay.
So that's where the trillions of worlds come from.
Okay.
And then when you do the statistics of what we have learned, you find out that about 3.6% can be Earth-like. That's what astronomers say, which is a lot.
Sure.
Because you're just dividing by 100. So if you have a trillion,
Sure.
dividing by 100 is a hell of a lot of places. And so you say, yeah, you can have billions of other Earth-like planets in our galaxy alone,
Okay.
which is true.
Okay.
The mistake, and this is a fundamental mistake, is to go from there to therefore there will be life in these worlds, and therefore there'll be intelligent life in these worlds, and therefore, look at all these jumps, and therefore this intelligent life will construct civilizations which are technologically based, and therefore they will have the interest, psychologically speaking, of being explorers, and therefore they're going to travel all over the place, including around here.
Yep.
So the point is, we have zero idea about the origin of life.
Mm-hmm.
And we do not understand how 3.5 billion years ago, maybe a little more,
Mm-hmm.
some primordial molecules in this planet got together and became a living thing. And what does that mean by a living thing? It means an agglomeration of chemicals that is able to get energy from the environment, eat, metabolize stuff, and reproduce.
Mm.
We do not know how that happened. And so the jump from, can I have amino acids in other worlds, the basics of proteins and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Just start sure, of course we can, and we do. But that tells us nothing about the existence of life in other worlds.
This is fascinating. You said something there. I want to double check. You mentioned this new study of life on other planets, something biology, astrobiology. Is that what you called it?
Biology, yeah.
And I think you said we've been able to map 6,000 other planets. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that means none of them obviously have this type of atmosphere, life, all that, right?
Well, okay, good question. So of all these worlds that we have seen, to ask about the composition of one thing is to say how heavy the world is and how big it is.
Hmm.
That we can tell you
Okay.
because the way we do this is that whenever a planet goes in front of a star,
Hmm.
it kind of obscures just a tiny little bit of the light of that star.
Mm.
Okay, it's called transit.
Okay.
And because of that, we can see, so if you have the light curve of the star is bright, 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 then it gets dimmer and then it
Sure.
gets bright again. And we can do this, which is really
It
spectacular.
is.
And it will tell us how big the world is, how far it is,
Wow.
what kind of the composition, if it's rocky, if it's gas-like Jupiter and stuff. To talk about the atmosphere, and we are doing this now, beginning to do that with the James Webb Space Telescope.
Okay.
What happens is, so the star is shining light. The planet goes right in front of it. It obscures some. So what I mean by obscure is that some of the planet's atmosphere, if it has atmosphere, will absorb some of the starlight.
Okay. Makes sense.
So when you compare the before and during, they're going to say, look at that. Before the planet was in front of the star, you could see this light, and the light tells you about the chemical composition of things
Mm.
because chemical elements glow in different colors, so to
Okay.
speak.
Yeah.
And when the planet goes in front of it, it eats some of those light waves, those wavelengths,
Hmm.
which tells you what is the composition of the atmosphere of that planet.
Got it.
Bingo. Because then you can, okay, does it have water? Does it have methane? Does it have ozone? And by doing that, you can say that planet in seems to be a planet that could be alive, meaning the atmosphere reflects the biological activity in the world.
Okay.
So an alien that would look at us would, if the alien knows what it is doing, I guess,
Right.
would be able to tell that this is a planet that is a living world.
Okay.
We haven't gotten there yet with the other worlds.
That's what I was wondering. The current science says that about 3.6% of the trillions, could have life. But if we are 0 for 6,000, wouldn't that statistically, you would start to assume if it's 3.6, then for every 100 we see, 3.6 of them should have life or something,
Not
right?
life. No, no, not life.
The conditions for life?
Not even. Just
Okay.
be Earth-like, meaning have the same
Uh,
radius and the same mass of the Earth.
oh, okay. Okay.
That's like the basic first step in
Sure.
this process.
Okay. Okay.
And of course, I'm always talking about life as we know it, meaning
Of course.
carbon-based, water-based. I have, if you start speculating about aliens that live in electromagnetic fields that
Sure.
vibrate in a certain frequency, that's great, but that is something that we can't say anything scientific about. So
Okay.
all I'm saying is that there are about 3.6% of the planets that exist look from an astronomical perspective like the Earth.
Okay.
Nothing about the atmosphere and certainly nothing about life.
Okay.
And that's the problem.
Okay. And that's the problem. All right. We can move past that because it makes sense. I just wanted to understand it. I have to ask you as we get back into your book and I'm starting to understand your ethos and where it comes from. I was in doing some research. I was looking just at the titles of previous articles you've written.
Yeah.
And obviously I'm going to talk about your bio in the intro, but I mean, I can't even pronounce most of the words in the titles of the articles you've written. So I want to know what got you from those types of articles to this book. Like, I'll just pick one: predicting atomic decay rates using an informational entropic approach, or cosmic metaphysics, being versus becoming in cosmology and astrophysics. Like, this is deep scientific stuff.
Mhm.
How do you get from writing that to this book, and why did you decide to make that transition?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Thank you for asking it.
Mhm.
So, I've been in public understanding of science for a very long time, right? I mean, this is my sixth book in English, I think, and
Okay.
the country I come from, Brazil, I mean, I've published many, many more.
Yeah.
So this has been part of my whole career because I think that science is too beautiful to be left only for the scientists. I
Mm.
think that we have a duty to inform the public about what it is that we're doing because at the end of the world, we got to remember that our research is being paid by the taxpayers, and they have to know why it is worthwhile to spend money, financing this kind of stuff. So that is one, and the most important one really is that science is part of our culture. It's how we look at ourselves, and it contributes to that vision. It's not the only way. I'm not going to say that science has answers to everything, because it does not. Quite the opposite.
Mhm.
That's you have to look at philosophy, you have to look at spirituality and religion, you have to look at arts to actually really construct a picture of what it means to be human. But science does have a big part on this equation, more and more, and so to humanize science, I think it's essential.
Mhm.
And and if you do look at my books, there is kind of like a transition from the more mostly scientific stuff, even though my first book is called The Dance Universe from Creation Meets the Big Bang. I always have had an interest and worry really in relating science to religion, to philosophy, to history, to show that it is a process of discovery, really, that there is no final answers to anything, that we're always learning something new about ourselves, and that these questionings are as old as the first human or before human looked up at the sky, saw those blinking stars and says, what the heck is that? And how come
Mhm.
they don't fall on us?
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
and why can't I grab it? Why is it so far away? And what, I mean, those are questions that basically nurtured the whole scientific approach, because that's what we're doing. We're trying to answer these very same questions these folks have asked thousands and thousands of years ago.
Mhm.
So why this book in particular, right? Because this book is different from my other books, not just because it connects philosophy and religion, because the others did too, but because the subtitle is a manifesto for humanity's future.
Right.
And when you write and actually I went back and I read the Communist Manifesto when I was a teenager.
Mhm.
I went back to read it because I wanted to phrase and construct the end of the book as a manifesto, kind of following the same example of Marx and Engels. So
Nice.
how do you write a manifesto after
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
So you come up with a very concise and strong mindset and point of view, and then you suggest action items to, like, okay, what it is that you're going to do in order to implement your change. So in the case of the Communist Manifesto, let's destroy the bourgeoisie, and and in my case, it's not that. It's like, let's rethink our relationship to the planet and to each other and to all life in this planet.
Mhm.
Because the framing of this book is really about the way we are functioning in this planet right now. It's not sustainable. We need to rethink our relationship with the world. We've sustained ourselves. I mean, think about this. We sustained ourselves for the last 200 years by essentially eating the entrails of the planet. The oil, the gas, the coal, all of this stuff is coming from underground. In fact, leftover stuff from animals that lived here millions of years ago.
Uh,
To sustain the fuel of our civilization comes from these fossils, fossil fuels. That's what they
sure.
call that, right? And that has been great, but it also came with a huge environmental cost. And now we are in a transitional time where we are beginning to realize that. More people should be realizing that, but that's part of the work.
Mm.
And we are realizing that, hey, look at that. The skies are giving us all this energy. Look, the sun shines, produces a huge amount of energy. Let's use that. The winds blow because the atmosphere is always in motion. Let's use that. And so instead of eating the planet, let's just open our antennas and our fans, to absorb the energy that is already out there in the skies, right? So
Mm.
that's the transition. But with that transition, you necessitate a different way of thinking about who we are. And so, what I try to do in the book is to construct a narrative of what it means to be human. And I know it's an ambitious project, but construct a narrative of what it means to be human, moving away from the we are above nature to we are very fundamentally part of nature and we are completely codependent with the life collective that we share this planet with.
Mm,
We can raise down mountains and create channels and do all sorts of incredible engineering things that we do, but we cannot stop earthquakes, we cannot stop volcanic eruptions, we cannot stop pandemics. They will happen. We can slow down or we can accelerate their end, but we are not above the natural. We are very much part of it. The air that you breathe, every time you breathe, you are taking in the world.
mm,
So if the world is sick, you're going to get sick.
right. So it almost feels like maybe for me, it's less about feeling above nature, but more about feeling part of it. Just recognizing they are us and the world and the planet and all of those things are less separable than we have come to believe.
Yeah, but most people do believe it because say, hey, science can solve all the problems. We are overpopulated, right? I mean, I always like to say this because it's such a mind-blowing number. 100 years ago, there were 2 billion humans in this planet.
Hmm.
Now there are 8.
Right.
We quadrupled the population of the planet in 100 years, which is why? Well, because of technology, medicine, food, but all these people have to eat, they need energy, they need fuel. How are we going to do this? Right? How are we going
Hmm.
to do this in a planet that is big, but it's finite in its resources and size? We
Right.
have to rethink how we connect to the world. And so, and clearly, this whole rhetoric of dystopian futures, the end of the world is coming, global warming and political strife, it's not working. It's not making people say eat a little less meat or use less water or whatever it is, or take public transportation. So because of, I guess, my personality and the way I like to think, I always think in terms of mythic dimensions, so to speak, because the questions I deal with are always kind of like origin of the universe, origin of life, origin of mind and consciousness.
Sure.
I said we need a new myth, a new mythic narrative of the human. And so that's where the whole space thing comes back to, because what I argue in the book is that we humans are much more important than we think we are, because we are the animals in this planet that are able to tell a story, which is the story of the universe, the story that we came from. We are more than anything else. We are the animals that can tell stories. And the stories that we have been telling are amazing, but they're also very destructive. And certainly the story that we've been telling, that we can do to the planet as we please, is a bad story. So the
Mm,
real story is that if you connect ourselves to the universe in a much deeper sense, and here we go. What are we made of? Well, calcium in the bones and iron in your blood. And where does all this stuff come from? Well, it came from exploding stars
right.
that exploded billions of years ago. So, Chris, you may be a young guy,
Hmm.
but this is the Chris that is this assemblage of atoms that exists right now. But the very stuff that makes you be Chris
Hmm.
is billions of years old.
Right.
So we are profoundly connected to the cosmic history. We really are, not over romanticizing, we really are how the universe tells its story. Are
Mm,
there other aliens there telling stories? Maybe, but we have no idea. We haven't heard from them. And the human story is the only human story in the universe, because Earth and every planet is different. There is no 2 Earths out there. There are no 2 Earths out there. No planets evolve in the same way.
right.
So that means that the life that possibly another world may have will for sure be different from the life here.
Right. And so I love how you call it the dawn of a mindful universe. Is the idea that we need to now essentially be more thoughtful about the way we coexist on this planet, as opposed to think of the planet as something that just serves us, that gives us what we need, that sustains our life, and that provides our fuel for growth.
Yeah, that's awesome. So mindfulness is kind of an overused word.
Right.
So you got to be careful about the meanings. And there are really two meanings. One of them is yes, hopefully people will become and are becoming, I think, more mindful of the way we relate to the planet, its resource, and also animal rights. I mean, the way we treat animals in farms is just horrendous, is
Yeah.
murderous, genocide, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And to a huge extent, I mean, anyways, let's not go there unless you want to.
Well,
But
we might. I'm going to put a note if we've got time.
but the other mindfulness here is really the fact that the universe only begun to tell its story because we gain a voice. We as a species gain a voice. So before we existed, there was no voice. There was just animals moving around and particles interacting by forces, animals in this planet. But most of the universe has been a sequence of particles interacting by gravity, electromagnetism, and the other nuclear forces, creating connections, but not being alive, and most certainly not telling stories, not searching for existential meaning, not trying to understand what is the reason that I'm here. Why am I waking up every morning? What is my sense of purpose? And suddenly, when we came around, and maybe other hominins, before us did that too, but we have no idea. So we focus on the human story, and the human story is the first story that we know of that tries to make sense of existence. And so the universe gains a mind through us. That's the dawn of the mindful universe.
Okay, my head just exploded. This is crazy. Man, I can't even be eloquent when something is this trippy. So I just wrote down my interpretation of what you were saying to an extent. And I want to think through it live with you because you're smart. I wrote that, our significance is our ability to question our significance and try to understand the place that gives us life. What you just described about how, like, something doesn't exist unless there is somebody there to observe it, right? And maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm literally thinking about this on the fly, but is there some cosmic just amazement at the fact that if it weren't for us, as far as we know, then the universe to an extent wouldn't exist, right? Because there's nobody there to observe it. There's nobody there to consciously, right? Prefrontal cortex, question it. I don't know. Rip that to shreds, because if that's true, I got to think about this for like a week.
Yeah, no, that is right on. So, my dog is a genius and whales are super smart, but they are not questioning the meaning of existence and trying to create a story that
Right.
will give them meaning. They will do their thing and they may, what do we know of what's going on in the brains of whales? But we do not have any evidence, concretely that they are creating narratives of existence. So the point is that we are different. And this is not about human exceptionalism,
Right.
which is a big problem. This is absolutely not about that. So I want to make that very clear. But it is about the exceptionalism of life.
Mm,
So I start with saying we are part of the life collective, but there is a difference, which is we are part of the life collective, but we are the ones that know it. And knowing that we are part of this, knowing that we are capable of creating experiments to search for the existence of alien visitations on our planet changes everything.
mm,
Because now we are using our existence to tell a story of who we are.
right.
And and the bottom story here is that we have no idea, and the mystery of existence is the biggest of all mysteries, and we try to deal with it in all possible ways, right? Through science, art, etc. And I came to this realization that, wait a second, the earth is the only Earth in this universe. There may be other planets out there, like, but they will not be this planet. And the
Right.
life here is unique. So that means that we are, and scientists don't like to say things with certainty, but I am going to say this with certainty. We are the only humans in the universe.
Mm,
Period. There may be other aliens that have left-right symmetry, they have ears and eyes. Sure, but we are the only humans. And the story that we tell about the universe is the human story.
mm.
And it's important because it's our voice.
And we get to choose what that story, essentially what it sounds like. How does it start? What's the middle? What's the end? And at this moment, I think anybody listening to this show will be of similar belief that, so far, or at least recently, the chapter we're on right now, it's not great. It's not great in terms of its relation to the planet.
Yeah. I mean, right? And so what are we going to do? Are we just going to keep waking up every day and pretending nothing's happening?
Right.
Or are we going to actually do a little bit of self-analysis and realize that the choices that we make represent the way we think?
Mm,
That's the hard part, right? Because you say, what am I going to eat today? Or how am I going to use energy? Or how am I going to raise my kids? And how am I going to relate to other animals and to other people? All of these choices that we make every day
mm-hmm,
tell a lot of the kind of person you are. And I
mm-hmm.
think nowadays, with this big global warming thing happening on our heads,
Yep.
it's so easy to be pessimistic, right? But being pessimistic, being Brazilian, I like to use soccer analogies, right? So being pessimistic is like you go into the field to start a game, but you don't even touch the ball. So you don't even
Right.
play the game. So
Right.
like I lost, who gives a damn, right?
Right.
And who is going to solve a problem that way? And what people do, and I've been guilty of that a lot of my life, but I think I'm better now, is we have this powerful, powerful cognitive dissonance with the way we are, thinking that the way we are does not affect the world. And the point is that the way we are as individuals, not just as governments, corporations, etc., affect the world.
Mm,
Because the little things add up. And the little choices that you make as a person, as a member of a family, as a member of a community, of a church, whatever you do, of a school teacher, those choices, the way you talk about life, the way you talk about the planet, the way you conduct yourself in the world, they resonate with other people. They can make people change. They may influence. They may inspire. I think that's the better word.
yeah.
Inspire people to join in. So I am a real, as opposed to Harari and a bunch of other guys that think,
Yeah.
the end is near, so forget it. Um, I do believe in the power of the kind
Mm.
to change.
I do too, but partly it's due to, I think that when our backs are up against the wall is the only time when we will truly make the necessary progress. And I just think that we're getting closer to that. In researching your book and in thinking about this topic, I had this thought that, what is causing these problems is progress to an extent, right? We've gone from 2 billion to 8 billion people. We, have more affluence than compared to other times in history, et cetera, et cetera. And if progress is hardwired into our evolution, right? That is, and I believe that to be true. It's a species component, right? As most species, I think, are. It's, hey, you want to make more of you, and et cetera. But here's the difference, and I think this gets into what you're talking about. If progress is hardwired into our evolution, but so is critical thought, then we can't use that as an excuse any longer, which I think oftentimes people do, right? This is what humans do. But we also have the ability to think critically about it and recognize the impact that progress is having, and is it actually serving us, which other species don't have.
Mhm. Right. So what if you rephrase that evolution tells us about progress to evolution tells us about survivability? It's
Mm.
really about surviving
Mm.
and thriving.
And we are
And
moving in a direction where that becomes less plausible or possible.
exactly.
Mm.
So if we maintain the greed towards progress that we have maintained so far, that becomes unsustainable really with the idea of survival of our own species. So we are reaching a point where the fundamental lesson of evolution, which is living things want to stay alive,
Right.
where we're getting into the let's self cannibalize, and who gives a shit, right?
Right.
Let's do it and let's go on. I mean, I had a conversation with this fellow another a month ago in a party that was I was horrified because he said, "Yeah, I understand all of this, but since we have all this natural gas and all this, why don't you just burn it real hard, real quickly now, so that we don't have it anymore and we have to move on to the other thing?" And that is exactly wrong.
Yeah, that sounds
So
insane, but
insane, but you know what? A lot of people think that way. And because the idea of, hey, there is money in this, and it's so hard for us to promote this kind of mindset change because it's really about perhaps less is more.
right.
Because you start to think about less for you and more for everyone. And you start to move from the this is my tribe and I have to take care only of my tribe to hey, there is one tribe, which is a human tribe. And
Mhm.
that one, we are all codependent on this. And I always been naive and romantic. I always hoped that the pandemic would, excuse me, I always hoped that the pandemic would have taught us that, that we are completely codependent on each other. It doesn't matter what your job is, we need you because without you, we'd be screwed, essentially, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
that simple. And the problem is that people seem to be forgetting that real quickly. The first respondents, the guys that were bringing the food from the farms to the market. Society collapses if it doesn't eat for 3 days.
Mm.
But we did eat. We didn't have toilet paper and people panicked on that one,
Mhm.
but we did eat and because of that we survived. But it is that fragile. So our balance, our superiority over the natural world is an illusion. And we
Mm.
have to reframe this conversation.
As you talk about that in the pandemic, which I think highlighted a lot of this human nature, the benefits and the negatives, it made me realize most of the time when I'm reliant on other people, I find it to be a positive experience. Meaning, like, we just had a baby. The amount of people that came together to make that happen and make it happen in a really caring, impressive environment. Right. It's a lot. Now, I don't know these people as far as I can throw them. In fact, we interviewed Harari a long time ago. And one of the things that stuck out to me was his assertion that one of the reasons humans are the top of the food chain is our ability to trust without knowing. Like we can trust the pilot even though we don't know them.
Mm-hmm.
What's fascinating to me is sometimes the more we get to know somebody, we will distrust them or distance ourselves from them, despite the fact that it's only because of some philosophical differences. But we'll go let them deliver our baby or fly our plane, and we'll be thankful for it. And so I think to some extent, what you're advocating for is to recognize we can have some of those discussions and some of those differences, but recognize that at the end of the day, we're all still part of the same tribe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that we should be curious about each other, even if we don't agree with everything we say. But I love that you brought this up. That you don't know who your pilot of the airplane voted for, but
Yeah.
you're trusting your life. And I think that's just remarkable, and that's so true.
Mm-hmm.
And so I call this the human hive.
Mm-hmm.
We have jobs that we depend on each other, and and why not celebrate that and get over some of the bigotry that is so rampant right now. And so the idea of celebrate, I call this the big principle in the book is called biocentrism. The idea that we put life center stage, and so it's not a Copernicanism, it's a post-Copernicanism idea that life is what matters.
Mm,
And that's what kind of, once you start to look at the world from that perspective, that life is what matters, you start to relate to other people, you start to relate to other animals and to this living planet in a very different way. And the corollary of this is that a living world, just like the indigenous cultures have been telling us forever, is a sacred world.
hmm.
And man, you go to Mercury, you go to Venus. Venus is a complete disaster. It's beautiful to look at sunset or sunrise, but
Yeah.
it's like total hell, 500 degrees, glowing rocks, and the smell of rotten eggs and sulfuric acid rain. I mean, you don't want to go there, right?
Yeah.
And Mercury is totally dead, and Mars is a frigid desert. And the other planets you can't even stand on because they're made of gas.
Mm,
I mean, only their core is solid. So you're like, wow, what a planet, man.
hmm.
What a planet. And why aren't we all celebrating this? And so maybe if there is an awakening that should be happening in the 21st century, is this one.
Mm,
The awakening for this special place we have and gratitude
hmm.
for the world that allow us to be who we are.
Yeah. Ooh. For a world that allows us to be who we are. I like that. And you mentioned what'd you call it? The hive, the human hive. It's funny because, no joke, I'm not even placating here in thinking about your book. So I have a beehive. We just got honey from it for the first time. It's a year and a half we've had it. And I am amazed by those animals. I mean, they are, it's astounding some of the things they do, but they ruthlessly at times will do what they need to sustain the hive, to keep it in a perfect harmony, if you will, right? It's really fascinating in terms of they will kill their queens so that the strongest one, but they do it for the good of the whole. In fact, I mean, when a bee stings you, it dies. We all know that. And I've watched them sting me, and they will willingly do it knowing that they're going to die, but in relation to the hive. So I love that idea. I had thought about that before even knowing that you refer to it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's collective intelligence,
Yeah.
and we have been fragmenting ourselves for way too long. And think about the power that we would have, if we thought more as a hive than as a little tribe.
Yeah. I want to ask you a last kind of question here. You mentioned at the beginning, you wrote this intentionally as a manifesto, and part of a manifesto has what actions can we take. I think a lot of people, look, we've all heard of climate change at this point, right? We've also heard what we can do. We need to recycle. We need to do all these things. So from a less, I want to say a less benign perspective, right? Somebody with your, perspective of the universe, what are the things you recommend to people, either from an action item perspective, but also from a mindset shift, from a cosmic viewpoint, that we can do?
Yeah. So they're all, I mean, in the list, there is a list of things. They're the obvious ones, right? The less meat, the this and that.
Sure.
Um, but to me, what's really essential, and I try to make this very clear and kind of maybe even too harsh at the end of the book, we have to reconnect with the natural world, and in ways that we have not, I mean, because as we segregate ourselves into big cities, we basically, what is a big city? Well, it's basically a place where you push nature out.
Mm-hmm.
But, mac- macroeconomically speaking, a city is where nature isn't, meaning the forests, they're all outside. And so, yeah, you build a park in the middle of the city, and maybe if you live in front of a river, or if you live in front of an ocean, you can go for a walk or a run and stuff like that. But the concrete jungle that we built is not the green jungle, is the concrete jungle. And it has been done to push nature out of boundaries because since the agrarian civilization, connecting back to the beginning of our conversation, nature was seen both as plentiful but also as a threat.
Hmm.
You know, you had the animals, you had this and that you had to be careful with. And so we have progressively forgotten that we are just part of this natural world because we have lived for so long away from it, you know. And so what can people do? I mean, I was in Italy this summer and I went to an astronomical viewing night, you know, in Tuscany with some friends. And because they knew I was an astrophysicist, they're all excited. It was
Sure.
an amateur, it was a lot of fun. But in talking to these people, who are just awesome people, all of them, many of them told me, wow, I had forgotten what the sky looked like. I hardly ever look at a star or observe a sunset, and I don't even know a difference between a star and a planet. And I don't ever take walks in woods or go on a trail run or walk or hike. And we have really, really moved away from this world. And of course, we don't think about nature when we push it away.
Hmm.
We don't see it. You know, you see what? Oh, you see the mosquitoes, which are annoying, or the cockroaches, or the rats in New York.
Hmm.
You don't see the good stuff. You just see this kind of stuff. But the point is that we are very much in need of this reconnection. And there are lots of groups doing that. You know,
Yeah.
there's this more like, I wouldn't call it new age because it's true, like forest bathing, the notion that you go into a forest and you monitor your physiological rhythms and your hormonal levels and your heartbeats, and everything goes to a better place.
Absolutely.
So there is good in being in the world because that's where we come from, you know.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've said this once or twice on the podcast before, but since I was about 21, so I'd say right around when I graduated college, started working. Work is stressful, life is stressful, being adult can be stressful, all those things, right? And lived in a more urban area. And I'd say once a month or so, once every 2 months, I would get this feeling, and I didn't know what it was, but it was so intense that I would go camping. That was my thing. I would go camping. And I didn't know this at the time, but me and some friends would go. Of course, we'd bring some beers and stuff. We'd bring an axe. We'd chop down some stuff. We'd have a fire. And I didn't know that I was doing it for the purpose of refueling, for the purpose of some kind of energy shift. Now, fast forward, I think start listening to myself more and more as I get older. And just a few years ago, we live on 3.5 acres in a forest, essentially. And the urge to go camping is pretty much gone. Now, I like it, but I don't need it anymore. But what I do every day after work, I go outside and I will either mow some grass or I'll trim some trees or something. I'll go to our garden. And I can guarantee you that if I were to wear these monitors, I would be able to see the difference just by being surrounded by greenery. I know it has a more profound impact. So I'm just saying that because I wholeheartedly agree with the mindset shift that you're talking about.
Yeah, people need to do that, and they say, "Oh, but I live in Manhattan, or I live in Cincinnati, and what can I do?" I'm like, There'll be parks, there'll be places where you can go and see the green. You can connect. You can, if you cannot get out of the city, you know, grow a bonsai tree and
Yeah.
connect to the world in more active ways and natural world in more active ways. Because honestly, you know, we are just the result of our experiences that we gain through relationships.
Hmm.
And, you know, now that I know you, I'm a different person and you are a different person because of this conversation. And this happens not just with people, but with trees, with pets, with animals, with the sky. Every time you interact with something, you become something new.
Hmm.
And so opening your mind and your spirit to this kind of connection. Like I need, just like you, I'm fortunate, I'm a professor at Dartmouth. We are out there and I live literally in a forest with
Hmm.
creeks, you know, right behind here. And I am a trail runner. So the Appalachian Trail is right behind my house.
Yeah.
And that to me is, I tell my friends, you know, I'm going to the temple.
Ah.
because that's where I worship,
Yeah.
and what it is, and if you think of the word religion, right, and say, oh, here it comes. Religion, the one of the ways you can think of the word is religare, from the Latin to reconnect.
Hmm.
So, in the traditional sense of the word, is a reconnection with God, whatever it is that you believe in.
Right.
But in our secular spiritual world, it really is a reconnection with nature and our roots as honestly animals that need this stuff.
Yeah.
We need to be out in the world. And the more we don't, the sicker you feel.
Yeah. I love it. Marcelo, I love that you have decided to take some of your knowledge and your understanding and your perspective and apply it to this type of message. And so the book is The Dawn of a Mindful Universe, a manifesto for humanity's future. Marcel, I really appreciate you being on. For those that are interested in this, obviously link to the book. Anywhere else that they can go find more about you or anywhere else you point them.
Yeah, just marcelogleiser.com and Instagram and YouTube. I have a ton of followers all over because I'm always connecting, bringing science and other things to the general public, and because I love doing it.
Fantastic. We will link to that and really appreciate you being on.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Chris.
All right.
It was
Thanks,
awesome.
Marcelo.